Welcome to this week's Power Up podcast. I am super excited this week to be joined by Dr. Jack Lewis. Now, I met Dr. Jack many years ago. In fact, it was 2011. We had both been invited to speak at a big conference in Tenerife. I think there was probably around about 1,000 or so people in the audience. And it was when kind of neuroscience has gathered speed as more and more speakers. And one of the things I find about neuroscientists, jolly clever people, and they speak in such a way that actually proves that point. The challenge, of course, with that is that we're left none the wiser at the end of the talk as to exactly what we're supposed to do with all this amazing magical science. Here is the point of difference, and this is the reason we have Jack on our podcast today, because he is one of the few people, not to say there are not others, but to say one of the few people that makes neuroscience accessible. And as such, besides being an author of several books and written several papers, he often gets invited onto various TV programs, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, Sky, Discovery, the list goes on. And the reason for that is because, as I said, he makes neuroscience accessible in such a way that we can learn from it and apply it in our own lives. So, Jack, thank you for coming on this podcast today with myself and Lisa. We're very much looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you also back in 2011 in Tenerife for fixing my slides, which were typically neuroscience and academic and way too much information. And you were kind enough, out of the goodness of your heart, with no other incentive other than altruism, to spend 2 hours with me on one evening, fixing them, making them more suitable for an audience of 1,000 salespeople. And then the next morning you did another hour because they still weren't right. So I still, to this day, I'm hugely indebted to you for that, Martin.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure. I was probably doing it for selfish reasons, so I could actually understand what you were saying.
And maybe also so you wouldn't have to cringe through my entire keynote.
It was a very successful event. I very much enjoyed it. And of course, we've had the benefit of listening to you recently as well. Jack very kindly came and spoke at one of our breakfast meetings.
And I think that, that was one of the massive reasons why we wanted to get Jack on the podcast as well, because the response to that event last week was just so fantastic. So thank you for spending more time with us and doing the session today. So what we're going to explore together is how our brains are built for change and the topic of neuroplasticity, which Jack will explain in just a bit. We'll look at the impact of technology and generative AI on how our brains work and cognitive function. We'll also explore what the implications of that are for the modern workplace, and finally touch on some safe and brain-friendly ways to make the best use of AI.
Obviously, yes, super hot topic. And one of the main reasons we engaged with Jack for our breakfast morning session with HR professionals recently was this fact that AI is one of those fast emerging technologies that has various different levels of traction depending on your generation, understanding. With it comes a little bit of fear. With fear comes cautiousness, and therefore we're not fully embracing the best use of technology. And this is a particular interest. Jack, you've been doing some research in this area, I believe, recently. So we'll come on to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Let's perhaps start with this. I'm sure people have heard the word, but let's not make any assumptions here. Neuroplasticity, what does that really mean?
Right, so neuroplasticity describes the human brain, the adult human brain's capacity to change, to physically change in order to support new skills. And so it's a topic I often speak about when doing keynotes, because it's so important for people to understand. It's not true that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. There's very much a clear sense that kids learn incredibly quickly. They're very adaptable from one day to the next, from 1 week to the next. You can really see them move on cognitively in leaps and bounds. But in adulthood, when we get into our professional careers, and maybe we're not challenged to learn quite so much, so regularly on a daily basis as we used to. And we feel that when we do need to turn our hand to learning a new piece of software or maybe experimenting with a new hobby, that it takes forever to get good at it. And that's really down to the sort of magic 3 ingredients of neuroplasticity are the thing that you're doing. You have to be doing regularly, ideally daily. You have to do it intensively in the sense of you have to be a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's like Goldilocks zone. It doesn't want to be too easy because then your brain won't bother to change. It doesn't want to be too hard, then it'll become futile and you can't make any headway. But you need to be ever so slightly out of your comfort zone so that you're challenged, and then you need to keep it up over long periods of time. So those 3 things are what cause neuroplasticity to happen. And you've got to remember that the brain is an incredibly economical organ. It doesn't waste resources if it doesn't have to. But if you're doing something every day, and if you're a little bit out of your comfort zone, you're keeping it up week after week after week, then your brain will change. It will lay down more synapses. So the brain neurons, the wire-like neurons that are embedded into the network of brain cells that support that skill will communicate more efficiently, and will, when you come to do that skill again the next time, you'll be that little bit better.
Remember you saying to me when we were planning these sessions, when I was saying to you how we have this battle in a lot of work we do where we're trying to help people change. You've got sort of one part of the brain, it would appear, that often people talk about this sort of resistance, this fear element. This is change. This is therefore I'm going to, a large part of our system is going, I'm going to keep you safe. But point you were making is that the very same brain that's trying to keep you safe also can allow you to change. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that true that, there's things like psychological safety, David Roth's SCARF model, all talking about how we get triggered because the fear of the unknown. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the brain is built to change, to adapt its capabilities to suit whatever environment it's spending lots of time interacting with. But that doesn't mean that it's easy, right? It can still be frustrating. To always be a little bit out of your comfort zone doesn't necessarily make you feel safe and comfortable. The whole point is you need to be a little bit out of your comfort zone. You need to feel a little bit unsafe, because if you're pushing yourself harder than you did last week, and last week harder than the previous month, then it means by definition there's a higher chance of failure than if you just did the same thing again and again and again. But if you do the same thing again and again and again, you don't move with the times. You can't keep up with the changes that are happening around you. And so it's not just that our brains adapt to the physical environment that we spend time in, also they adapt to the digital environments that we spend time in. So, we have a portal through our laptops, through our smartphones, through any other device to the whole of the internet, all the videos on YouTube, all of the podcasts in the universe, well, in the world at least. There's such an infinity of information that we could be digesting and learning from at any one moment. It can feel overwhelming to tackle it, or with a new task. When you're learning something new for the first time, it can feel really uncomfortable because you doubt whether you can do it. You remember having been forced to do it at school, but if you haven't in adulthood chosen to learn new skills on a regular basis, then you'll feel really out of your comfort zone, and you'll feel vulnerable, and you'll feel discouraged from tackling it. But the good news is that learning to learn is something you can learn. I know that sounds crazy, but there's good evidence out there to show that someone who, when they got out of their formal education and they continue just in their spare time to learn new things, learn a language, learn a new piece of computer software, they find it easier to learn because their brain is in a more neuroplastic state. So the speed with which the neuroplastic change happens is faster than in people who haven't tried to tackle anything new for years. But the point is, anyone who comes to learn something new will find it, if they keep it up, this being outside of their comfort zone, they will gradually, slowly but surely feel more comfortable doing it, and the learning will take place faster. So you can unstick even a slightly stultified brain.
And also, I guess when you maybe learn things, at school, you're sort of forced to learn stuff, aren't you? Is there a difference in terms of when you're slightly older, maybe you are choosing?
Absolutely.
You want to do something. So motivation to learn.
For sure. So there's a big difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation, intrinsic rewards, it's whereby the journey is the destination. If you're learning something that you find fascinating, then you don't have to kind of grit your teeth and force yourself to persevere because you're enjoying the process. Whereas extrinsic motivation, extrinsic rewards, it's where there's some carrot dangling in the distance. And so the process of getting there isn't enjoyable, but reaching the goal is the main thing. And so, you know, you can have a situation where you might have been forced to learn something at school that at the time you weren't interested in at all. So you were only extrinsically motivated by, I don't know, the reward of passing the exam or getting the grade you were hoping for.
Yeah.
Whereas you can tackle that same subject matter a few years later when you've got, let's say, for example, for me, I wasn't that interested in maths, and I was doing double maths at A-level, and I quit after 1 year because I had my maths A-level. I knew I could get into university just with 3 A-levels. I didn't need the fourth one. And I've never regretted anything more in my life, because later on when I became a neuroscientist, that extra maths would have made me not twice as good at neuroscience. It would have made me 10 times, 20 times better, because I would have understood the maths I was using to analyze the brain scans. And so I willingly went back into maths to try and get into it. And so, you know, reluctantly at school, willingly, because it would enable me to get to where I wanted to be, which was a deeper understanding of the brain and how it works.
And I guess at the moment we've got, you know, the world is changing, the context is changing so fast technologically that we're almost being forced to do it. But also on the same time, we are intrinsically motivated because, you know, if we don't do that, then, you know, we're going to be out of date and possibly out of work.
Exactly. It's all about mindset. So if the mindset is, I've got to do this, otherwise I'm going to be rendered obsolete, then that you'll do it through fear, you know, of the unknown, but you won't necessarily do it with great enthusiasm, where having done an hour, you think, you know what, I'm hungry, but I'm going to push through because this is so fascinating. So Gen AI is a great example of that. There's so many tools that people are being encouraged to use at work, right? But work is boring. You can generate, most people's work is boring, but you know, there are so many tools coming out of the Gen AI world of innovation that are actually fun to play with, where you, as the arbiter of taste, you know, could generate an image on the basis of a prompt. Say, let's say, show me a brain with light bulbs flying out of it in all directions, multicolored like a rainbow. And you look at the output of the Gen AI model and you think, okay, out of those 4, no, they're all rubbish. And then you think, okay, how can I describe that a little bit more literally so that this silly machine can understand what it is I'm imagining? And then you try again and try again. And then you go, okay, that one this time is much closer to what I was imagining. And you can click a button to get a variation. You get 4 variations on the same thing. You go, okay, that one actually I quite like. And then you can upscale it. So you can have, so some tools are boring and stultifying to you. Some tools are actually quite fun to see what they can do, and also to see how well you can drive it. So you can have a task, get better at Gen AI and make yourself aware of how it works. And it can seem, with one mindset, absolutely overwhelming because there's so many things to try. But with a different mindset, like at the weekend when you've got an hour or 2 to spare and you think, okay, this could be fun. You've got a list of 5 of the 5,000 tools out there and you think, these are all fun things to test drive. Let's see what I can do. And then once you pick away at it, the fear closes down a little bit because your knowledge starts to expand. And this time last year, I was terrified of Gen AI because Rishi Sunak, then Prime Minister, had convened all of the biggest like professors in AI and big thinkers. And they're like, there's an existential threat when generative AI gets as intelligent as we are, it'll soon surpass us, and then we're all toast. Like literally, it's a threat to humanity. But having read much more widely, having played with lots of different tools, and also being very aware that could happen in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years time, this moment of passing the singularity. In the meantime, it's a playground of really fun tools. So if you learn to drive the bus, then you can have a lot of fun.
Okay, so let's just back up, because I'm particularly interested before we get really into the Gen AI element. A lot of the people listening to this podcast, they could be leaders, people who are in self-development pathways, learning professionals, etc. And one of the things that we are all about is really trying to help people to have their best life. And a massive part of it, cannot get away from it. The one thing that holds people back more than anything is confidence or lack of confidence. Put people back in control of their fear. Now, give them a playbook for dealing with fear. Fear is there to serve us. It stops us driving off a cliff or doing silly stuff. But we also know that unconsciously, we can end up avoiding tasks or situations, not going for a promotion, not embracing. We're talking about Gen AI now, but more generally in organizations, there could just be a change, a restructure, and people go into meltdown. And I'd like to know a little bit more about why does the brain automatically do that? Why does it automatically go into this space of going, oh, stop, 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 stop? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I have lots of coaching sessions of very bright, sharp people, yet I see them literally freezing in their headlights at the thought of having to do something different or bigger than they're currently doing at the moment. What is really going on in the brain? Why does it create this electromagnetic surface?
Surge.
Sorry, what's the word?
Surge. Electromagnetic surge. That was what I was guessing you were
Yeah,
thinking.
that causes us to go stop rather than go forward.
It's fear of the unknown. It's really straightforward. It's all about uncertainty. So we're always having to make decisions under certain degrees of uncertainty. And if we've done something many times before, well, we don't know for sure what the outcome's going to be. We can trust our gut instinct because we don't have any conscious awareness of the decision-making processes that go on in our brain. But once they reach a conclusion, it makes, gut feeling is we get a visceral sensation in our body. In some people, it's their breathing. In some people, it's in the pit of their stomach, hence gut feeling. If you've got lots of experience of a certain type of decision-making scenario, you can trust your gut feeling. It will lead you well because you've had enough experience of trial and error, trial and error, trial and error to get a sense of which things tend to work out well and which things tend to work out badly. Whereas if someone's completely restructured the way you do your work, you don't have any past experience to rely upon to inform that gut feeling, to allow you to make the right unconscious decisions and then follow that gut, and then things turn out well. You're having to gather a whole load of new trial and error experience before you can have faith that this new system will work for me in my role. It might work for the company overall, it might be better, but for me in my world, is it going to cause me more headaches? Are the people that I'm responsible for managing going to just be coming to me the whole time with problems relating to this restructure, which means I can't get my own work done? And yeah, often when there's change, if it hasn't been properly thought through and it hasn't been carefully executed, it can in the short term cause people headaches such that when they leave work, they're still worrying about all of these uncertainties at work, maybe even all the way through the weekend. But then after a period of time, you gain experience, you gain faith in the new structure, you realize that it's not as bad as the worst case scenarios you were imagining. And then little by little, you can sleep better at night and you can stop thinking about work through the weekend.
There's something in the way that we communicate that change to people then that can help sort of short circuit, because eventually, as you say, the familiarity builds confidence, and then eventually we get to a point where it's just normal. There's no issue, and you don't get triggered by the uncertainty. Is there a way to put ourselves back in the driving seat, if you like, of our own fears? Is there a way of sort of short circuiting that? Something we can do, or something in the way that we communicate the change to other people?
I guess it depends on, it sounds like a cop-out, but it depends on the exact type of change. Like, is it a subtle change or is it a major overhaul? The only general rule of thumb I can think of is thinking back to times when change was forced upon you and how, it might not have been smooth running to begin with, but you did get through it. And then eventually things worked out well. Or indeed, if things didn't work out well, the change was implemented and it caused chaos. And then, everyone still harks back to, do you remember when it was the previous way? You know, like some types of change you can anticipate. Well, here we go again. We tried to do this last time and it didn't work. So try and understand what is different about the implementation this time round. And I think gathering information from other people who architected the change to understand, A, have they thought about the things that you're worrying about? B, if they have thought about it, what mitigations have they put in place to avoid the inevitable things? And you may find that people have done their due diligence and they have thought it through and they have learned from past failures, and this time it's going to be better. And if not, make them put in those mitigations, hold them to task and create a bit of a fuss that predicting that this happened last time, and to repeat the same mistakes is not good for the business. That you don't have to shame anyone individually, but you can certainly point out how it would make sense to at least move cautiously to begin with, rather than just switch off one machine and switch on the other.
Is there something about the moment before you get into a place where something becomes, like when you're learning a new skill, you go sort of a period of sort of frustration, and then suddenly you pop out the other side, and whether you're learning to play the guitar or learning a talk or something, there's a sort of period of frustration, and then suddenly you're in this sort of very playful, magical zone, aren't you? Something
Absolutely.
in the zone.
And you feel elated, and you have to anticipate. No one said that being a human was going to be like non-stop, happiness and lollipops. Like, happiness is designed to be fleeting. The size of the satisfaction that you experience is commensurate with the amount of effort you put in. So by which I mean, if you hang on and you have an appetite, anticipating that to begin with, it's going to feel like you're getting nowhere, but having the faith that if you stick at it, ideally daily practice, like little bit every day, half an hour every day, 20 minutes every day. But by a couple of weeks, a month later, there will be a palpable difference in how you do, and you will pop out the other side. And rather than everything going really slowly and you get no sense of progress, you will get to that point where it's like, oh my God, this was so difficult before. I can do it. I can do the first 3 stages effortlessly. Now it's just the last 1 or 2 stages that's slightly tricky. Then you feel buoyed by it. And the people who are happiest are the ones who willingly go into those situations where they confront their ignorance, they learn something new, they go through those hard yards, and then they come out of it the other side. The more experience you have of going through that process, that inevitable process, and there's no shortcuts, the more you will benefit from unhesitatingly just jumping into the next thing and allowing yourself to fail. That's the thing. Failure in a new thing is inevitable. So when you fail, it's all about how you talk to yourself. There are 2 ways of thinking it. One, failure is, okay, that was an opportunity to learn. I did that wrong, but I won't do it wrong the same way next time. You're shutting down the cul-de-sacs that you might go through that don't lead anywhere. Meaning, in the optimistic perspective is not, I'm a failure. It's great. I've worked out a number of different ways that don't lead anywhere, which means there's a smaller number of avenues to go down. So I'm more likely to have success from here on. And it's a lot about mindset. It's a lot about how you speak to yourself and the language you use to speak to yourself, and what your attitude to failure is. Failure is moving forward. Failure is not, I'm a bad person and not good at this.
And I think that leaders listening to that's, a big lesson for them as well. It's culturally how an organization or they as leaders set the tone in terms of the attitude to failure. And it sounds like, there is a role in leadership where the way they communicate and throughout the process of change of slowly rewriting the story that we tell in our heads about this is hard, this is going to be difficult, this is, going to be more work or whatever.
Absolutely. The key thing about failure is to take the time to do something which is quite uncomfortable, which is to go back to that, it's to sort of wallow in that failure, to go back and examine it and work out what caused it. Because until you reach the point of failure, it's really hard to work out why it's going to go wrong prospectively. It's much easier to work out why it went wrong retrospectively. Now, it's not a pleasant thing to do, but again, we can take some inspiration from how the brain is structured. Most of the time when a brain sends a signal, there's been a prediction in the brain of how something's going to turn out. And if the sensory stimulus coming in from the outside world agrees with that prediction, very little information is passed on. If the prediction was wrong, then an error message is generated to go back to the neurons that generated that prediction in the first place to say, no, you got that prediction wrong. The brain is a pattern spotting machine, and it's fueled by responses to error so that you can update your understanding of how it works and make better predictions in future. Without the error, you can't make better predictions of how to go in the future. So with any new structural change, if you don't take the time because it's unpalatable to examine why the thing went wrong, then you'll never learn and move forward. And you arm yourself with that knowledge to not make the same mistakes again. The worst case scenario is feeling uncomfortable and I just don't want to think about it. I don't want to engage with it. I don't want to spend my time like looking at my mistakes, because it's the only way you learn.
And then you just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over.
And you won't know why it keeps going wrong. And the locus of control is without. The world, like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just not getting a run of luck at the moment. No, the locus of control is within. What I can do here in response to this failure or perceived failure is go into it, go through it with a fine-tooth comb and work out what happened. So I can make sure it doesn't happen again, or I can move things around, nudge the change so that it sort of takes on a slightly different form in order that some, change that was failing again and again can actually work.
I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. That your brain is just looking at patterns and recognizing,
updating the operating system.
Yeah. Can I also? I mean, I think we've got a great opportunity here because we read all this stuff in these books and listen to podcasts, but now we've actually got a bona fide neuroscientist in front of us. Like to understand more about is the almost like the opposite end of what we've been talking about here, and that is flow state. And I've read this idea that when someone's on a surfboard or they make these sort of micro movements, or they're on a in a big wave, and they could go one way and kill themselves, and another way they survive and they do amazing things. They talk about this idea that the prefrontal lobes shut down and suddenly there's no critical voice. Could you just clarify a little bit about that?
Flow states are brilliant. Funnily enough, I told you I was yesterday in the library researching a report. A big component of it was flow. So flow is when time flies when you're having fun, in the sense that you're absorbed by what you're doing. And it goes back to that Goldilocks state. The thing that puts someone in flow is whereby the task that you're tackling is neither too easy nor too hard, but just right. You lose track of time. You don't feel like you're working, because you're in that sweet spot where you're feeling challenged but not overwhelmed. And when you're in flow, if you had someone like wired up with EEG, you get this very strong signal, a theta signal, from the medial prefrontal cortex, where the left and right hemispheres meet behind the top of the forehead. You get this emanation of theta waves, right? But that's not the interesting bit. The study that I was looking at the weekend showed that once someone is in flow, as proven by the fact you're getting this theta wave coming out of that part of the brain, if you monitor heart rate, and you can work out from various heart rate measures whether you've got sympathetic drive, which is the sympathetic nervous system gets you ready for action. It increases your respiration rate, increases your heart rate, so that you've got lots of glucose and oxygen all around body and brain, preparing you for action. You also get extra muscle tension, so you're like on a trigger, ready to move. And then the parasympathetic drive is the opposite, and they work very much antagonistically. It's when the time for action is over and you're resting and digesting. You're very much like ramping everything down. You're breathing slower, your heart rate slower, everything's sort of slowing down because you need to recover from the periods of exertion. But what happens when you're in flow is that you get both parasympathetic and sympathetic drive happening gently at the same time. And what that means is it's having a relaxing effect on you, but also a stimulating effect simultaneously. And when one gets into flow, and that's just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, not the hard yards of I feel like I'm not getting anywhere, but you actually build up momentum. Your brain's really locked in. You're sustained your focus. You can go for longer. Instead of getting up and being distracted every 5-10 minutes, like, wow, an hour went by and I don't know where that went. And I think I just want to finish this last thing, and you can go for another half hour. You do feel like this calm, animated sense of engagement. And flow is just the most wonderful state of mind to be in.
I often find, if there's something, like a report or a proposal or something like that to write, before doing it, the anticipation of doing it is like, God, I've got that thing to do. But then once I think, right, just start it, and then see what happens. And then, before you know it, hours have passed, and it's so satisfying. Then when you get to the end of it and it's done, it's almost, you lose track of time, but you get that massive sense of satisfaction at the end.
Yeah.
It's like super intelligence in a way, isn't it? It's like you're tapping into this amazing super intelligence.
In reference to your own normal level of intelligence, it's better than your normal capability. I agree.
I think the point I was making earlier is that to get there, sometimes we have to go through a stage of feeling agitated, frustrated, tension, and then suddenly we pop out. We've got to keep going, keep yourself moving in that direction, but acknowledge it. Don't get wound up by it. Go, this is a precursor to something great happening.
No, but that's really acceptance of that part of the process. If you want to get through to that sweet place of being in flow, you've got the anticipation of, oh my God, that's going to take me hours.
Yeah.
And you'd rather be in the pub or whatever. And then you've got that, come on, just get down to it, stop procrastinating. And then you've got that first maybe 10, 15 minutes where you're perhaps a little bit reluctant to get into it because you know that it's going to be long. But just get through all of that, grit your teeth and bear it, because you will get through to a bit eventually when you've got the adequate levels of, like, you've eaten something recently, but you're not full of food and feeling a bit like you've got a food baby. You've got some caffeine in your system, like your brain is like, okay, primed and ready for the next hour or two. And actually doing all of that other stuff so that you increase the likelihood of locking into that flow a bit sooner. The prep in the hours leading up to it. Did you get a good night's rest the night before? Are you taking steps to get 7-8 hours every night? Are you having a kind of breakfast that is slow release carbs, digesting over the course of the morning so that the glucose is being
low GI,
fed into your, low GI, fed slowly into your bloodstream rather than bowl of Frosties, bang, the whole lot of glucose floods into your system. You spike, you've got loads of energy, insulin sucks all that excess glucose out of your bloodstream, and then you crash again half an hour later, and then you just snacking all the way through the morning. All of these things, you need to have like a good overall strategy. I mean, you can get into flow even if you've eaten Frosties in the morning and had a terrible night's sleep, but you won't be able to maintain it for as long as if you've done all of that sort of good brain hygiene, that good brain maintenance in your day-to-day habits.
And I think that sort of leads us perfectly into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is the impact of technology and Gen AI, because obviously if you've got pings going off left, right and centre, that's going to interrupt flow. So do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of how
absolutely
technology is affecting our ability to perform, and then we can explore how it also can really help?
Yeah, for sure. So we're unwittingly part of a global experiment, and we are all guinea pigs. Like no one took technology and said, is this safe to put out into the world? We put it out into the world, and then retrospectively, we're working out if it's safe. Like, to what degree does it offer benefits? To what degree does it offer disadvantages? And of course, to say, technology is good or bad is absolute nonsense, because there's different types of technology. For any given individual technology, there's different ways of using it. As a general rule of thumb, people who use any type of moderation in excess run the risks of negative outcomes. And it's partly because of the neuroplasticity story. Your brain can adapt to your regular, intensive, long-term use of your smartphone in a way that is not actually to the betterment of your overall life. So, for example, people who do tech multitasking, which means that they're rarely doing one thing at a time. If they're watching telly, they've also got a laptop on their lap and they're surfing the internet, and they're periodically, flicking their attention over to their smartphone when a notification comes in. If you get people who are heavy media multitaskers, and these people typically flip their attention from one media to the next, medium to the next every 15 seconds, incredibly short periods of time they're paying attention on any one thing. And you compare them in a very simple visual task to people who are low medium multitaskers, people who typically use one medium at a time. You find that the heavy medium multitaskers are much more easily distracted. So if you add 2 distractions in the task, then that's fine. They can handle that. If you add 4 extra lines in a simple visual task, their performance drops, but not the low medium multitaskers. And if you add 6 distractions, the low medium multitaskers are fine. Their performance stays exactly the same as it was when there were no distractions. But the heavy medium multitaskers performance level has dropped again. They miss a very simple to notice change in the visual array. So what does that mean? That suggests, but doesn't prove, that their use of multiple types of technology is rendering them more distractible. They find it harder to block out distractions. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If the way they're regularly intensively engaging with the tech world is to constantly cycle their attention, then they are primed and ready to notice that a ping's gone off, to notice that something interesting's happened on the TV show, to think, oh, I'll look up something. They're like a squirrel, constantly moving their attention around. So that was the first clue in 2009 that maybe technology's screwing us up. And then since then, there's been a flood of stuff. Let's stick to smartphones and just smartphone use on its own. Just the ping of a smartphone going off, even if you don't pick it up, is enough to pull away cognitive resources from what you're doing, such that if you're doing quite a complex task, it'll take you longer to do it. You'll make more errors. The end product won't be as high quality. So what do you do about the ping? put your phone on silent. Having put it on silent.
And your watch and your iPad and everything else.
So it's about, are you master or slave to your devices?
Yeah.
If you're allowing things to go ping and draw your attention away from what you're doing, it's going to be breaking flow to your original point over and over and over again. So the work that you were doing, instead of doing it in flow very, very quickly and efficiently over the course of an hour, you have to break it up into little 2-3 minute sections, and it'll take 2 to 3 hours to do it. Don't quote me on that, but it's that kind of a difference. If you're doing it by getting distracted by an email and then coming back to it, getting distracted by a text message and getting back to it, getting distracted by a phone call and getting back to it. It's just an incredibly inefficient way of doing it. Anyone tells you they're good at multitasking, there is no such thing as multitasking. There are like a handful of people in the world that can do genuine multitasking, as in you're so, if you're listening to this, you're so unlikely to be one of those people, right? They're rare as hen teeth, right? When you think you're multitasking, what you're actually doing is switching your attention to something else, which you think you're doing in parallel, but you're not. You're doing it in series. And then having attended to that, you then have to drag your attention back to what you were doing beforehand. And there is always a switch cost. It always takes a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes, to get back to where you were. But to get back into the state of flow that you were in previous to a disturbance is estimated to be 23 minutes, not 23 seconds, 23 minutes. Yeah. So even if you have your phone on silent, if it's right next to you, as mine is now, just having that potential for stimulation. Oh, I could check my emails, or I could check my messages. I wonder who's got in touch with me on WhatsApp. Even just having it within arm's reach is enough to, again, use up cognitive resources that you could be spending on the task you're doing, but instead it's being used to block the temptation to pick up your phone. So don't just put it on silent, put it away. Sleep with it in a different room, because people who use their phone at night, they take longer to get to sleep. They sleep for a shorter duration. They have more periods of nocturnal wakefulness, meaning they wake up in the middle of the night. Why? Because they incentivized it. Every time they do that, they pick up their phone and do something fun. Don't do that. Go downstairs and clean the oven. Do something unpleasant if you wake up in the middle of the night, because you're telling your unconscious, if you wake me up in the middle of the night, there is no nice read a story or play a game or catch up on some work or whatever, which gets it out of the way for the following day. It's absolutely nonsensical to allow technology to derail brain function morning, noon, and night.
And it's, two things. Well, first of all, do you think, and is it proven that the rise in cases of, neurodiversity, ADHD, and that sort of thing is technology and that constant interruption a cause, or is it just we've got a term for it now?
Yeah, no. So that's a very good question. There are lots of things that have led to the rapid, rocketing increase in rates of ADHD diagnosis, and that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it's about not being able to pay attention on one thing for very long, unless it's that thing that you find super absorbing, and then for those people you can't get them to stop doing that one thing that they love doing. So ADHD is often misunderstood. Yes, there's a contribution if doctors are more aware of it, and so there's a higher likelihood that they're going to diagnose it. But no, that doesn't account for such a huge rise. No. If you put the rise in ADHD alongside the rise in smartphone use, the rise in spending not just 1 or 2 hours, but 6, 7, 8 hours a day playing fast action-paced video games, it's quite clear, in adolescence at least, that the rocketing rates of ADHD in adolescence is probably due to the huge increase in excessive video gaming in boys predominantly. And then there are similarly rocketing rates which mirror the advent of the iPhone, the availability of social media wherever you go, rocketing rates of anxiety and depression among adolescent girls. And it's all about the amount they consume, like 20 minutes a day, no worries, but 4 or 5 hours on social media a day, it's just the rates of anxiety are much, much higher. And so it's not just about kids. A lot of this research is done with kids. So the nocturnal wakefulness stuff, that research was originally done with kids. And then they thought, well, maybe it's the same for adults. And they found it was. Surprise, surprise. Because it's about reining in the excesses of use to moderate or mild areas of use. And the one thing people have to remember is that the apps on our smartphones are specifically designed to be as addictive as possible, not out of any kind of meanness or evil, but because that's how they make money. If our attention is on their app, then then they make better advertising revenues, and they do A/B testing where they test two different versions of it, and whichever one keeps you glued for longer, that's the system they use, or that's the advert they use, or that's the video that they use. And it sounds like a conspiracy, but we're fighting against very clever, powerful software engineering that is trying to keep us glued. So we have to take extra special effort to reduce our exposure to it and delete certain apps. TikTok's being banned in the US, right? Or it's on the verge of, for good reason. It's the most addictive of all of those video apps.
Just the thought that comes to mind here as you're speaking there. All this, what you're describing, stops us feeling things.
Yeah, and it displaces time we could be doing something unrelated to technology.
So we're not actually really feeling with our full sense, and or being able to connect and have empathy and feeling, because it's almost like we're disassociated from it, and we're just looking for a very quick hit over and over again.
Correct. Shallow. It encourages shallow consumption of everything. And while you do get feelings, you do get extreme levels, like, because the stuff that really keeps people glued is outrage. So it's very good at, these algorithms are very good at guiding us towards things that make us go, oh my God, I can't believe it, because that's very shareable. And if you share it, you get lots of responses and likes and, people giving you positive feedback, making you feel better about yourself. But it's peddling pointless, fake feelings so when I agreed with you saying it's stopping us feeling, there is a very broad palette of emotional responses that we can have to each other, to events in the world, and it's narrowly tailoring us to the ones that keep us on the apps. So it could be like kitten videos, to make us happy, and then videos of outrageous things happening to make us feel outraged, and so it gives great big peaks on those two parts of the emotional spectrum. But what about all the others? And empathy is a huge one, right? Empathy is empathy is specifically understanding how another person feels on the basis not just of what they say, but their body language, their facial expressions, their eye movements, this huge broad channel of body language that we get that really adds nuance to how that person's feeling. With so many different brain areas are specifically attuned to the body language that other people show to help us do this empathy, which is essentially theory of mind. I'm getting into other people's brains and trying to understand what are you thinking right now? What are you feeling right now? And if you spend your whole time looking at a phone instead of looking at each other, your capacity for empathy is seriously reduced. So that's another reason why being glued to phones is really bad for emotional breadth and depth.
I mean, it was slightly triggered by a conversation I was having with my 22-year-old daughter last night. I called her up and asked her how she was, and she was saying, "Oh, not great." And she was, she had recently split up with her boyfriend recently, so she's sort of dating again. And she was explaining to me how she had a couple of dates with this guy, and he was saying all the right things, and it was all lovely and blah blah blah. And then she completely ghosted.
Oh.
And I said, look, I do feel that there is a growing, we're kind of like developing people that are, as I say, void of these feelings, of really understanding how what you do and what you say to people do have feelings. We're almost like we're in a world of now gratification, and therefore we're not necessarily learning those skills of actually what you do and what you say. People have feelings. I just think that's a concern of mine. And what you then see is this rise in mental health. Is it actually because we're becoming less able? We're not actually having it harder. If anything, we've got it a lot easier than we've ever had in life. But we're finding it harder to deal with setbacks, deal with when you do get rejected or you do get something goes wrong, we don't seem to have the capacity to be able to deal with it.
Yeah. So So I'm a big fan of Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. Anxious Generation is a book that's really causing huge waves at the moment, and for good reason. And he attributes this to the fact that when I was young, growing up in the 80s, I could go out and play all day long, so long as I came back when the lights came on. Back then, for a 5, 7, 8, 9-year-old to do that, it was much more dangerous out there. Like statistically, the kind of dangers that were out there, it was much higher. Now, in 2020s, those dangers in suburban West London are much, much lower. Like, that's a fact. Yet the perception of danger is much higher. Right. So parents don't allow their kids to go out. Now, why is it important to go out and roam? Because when you're out, you have to look after yourself, and therefore you get practice having to make your own decisions and look after yourself, and you hang out with other kids, let's say, through up to the age of 10 and also through adolescence, and you get practice making your own rules rather than there always being someone overseeing things and telling you kids what to do this, do that, do the other. You learn to self-organize, right? So when you learn to self-organize, it increases your sense of self-efficacy. I don't need other people. I can rely on myself to do this.
Yeah.
It builds your confidence. You get into pickles, and then you work out a way of getting yourself out of that pickle. Now, sure, sometimes that means calling your parents for help, but not by picking it out of your pocket and calling them instantly when anything happens.
Yes.
It's, did you remember to bring 20p? Go down to the payphone. You have to know where the payphone is. Go and find it. You have to have memorized the phone number. You have to dial the phone. The kids were given more responsibility for themselves, which meant by the time they reached adulthood, they had hundreds more experiences of having sorted it out for themselves.
Yes.
Whereas adapted to different situations.
Again, so as we were talking earlier about how when a change happens, do you greet it with horror? Well, yeah, because all those systems I can unconsciously rely upon have now gone out the window because there's a whole new thing to learn. You will get back to that way, but these kids, we're sending them out into adulthood having prescribed every aspect of what they can and can't do, and they haven't had any time to work it out for themselves. So, well, when I read that, I was like, that really, really makes sense. Like he's a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, but he's a professor and I'm not. But from a neuroscience perspective, it really, really makes sense.
I heard that described. I was reading something the other day, and that was, being outside, and I think it was like 85% of us used to sort of spend time outside. Now it's 7% of kids.
So this is what I was talking about, the displacement.
Yeah.
It's not that technology is necessarily bad. The things that they could be doing on technology could be really beneficial. They could be using ChatGPT or Claude or one of these Gen AI things. They could be saying, look, quiz me on Columbus because I've got a test coming up, and then it could give you 101 different ways of doing it, and you'll learn so much in the process of being quizzed. But if you're spending all of your free time on a screen, it means you're not out there climbing up trees or doing, we humans are very manual. Like our ability to manipulate our fingers and hands, doing craft, using tools, climbing frames and playground activities and climbing trees and all that stuff, or building stuff, we're really happy and we get into flow really quickly when we're, like, let's say an infant, building blocks or like trying to interact with things. But as we get older, we just end up tapping or hitting smartphone screens. And board games are boring compared to Grand Theft Auto or whatever other game, Call of Duty. But you can actually get into flow when doing board games because you're picking up tiles and you're putting them down, you're thinking, and it's a slower pace and it's calm. But if you've been raised on like super stimuli, then normal bog standard humanity seems boring by comparison. But actually, if you get into it, it's innately pleasurable to manipulate things with our fingers, and we don't do that if we're stuck in all day like bashing keyboards.
And I heard it described as being like cheap dopamine, that quick sort of dopamine versus the sort of slightly harder earned. The cheap dopamine causes pain in the long run. The hard earned.
Dopamine Nation is a good book on that subject matter. So yeah, definitely.
Just to think about this from a slightly different perspective, I'm thinking about this from if someone is listening to this who is millennial or whatever the younger age is, like 20s or so, they could be listening to thinking, guys, what are you talking about? This is the world we're in.
Yeah.
And it's the world we're going to be in the future. And we are in a digital age. And therefore, does this really matter? Do I need to feel things as much? Do I need as much empathy? I mean, I'm not
very interesting position, Martin. I like it. And that's very relevant. I am
just trying to think about
guilty of being,
could be very different.
So there are lots of young people in that age group who have noticed that being glued to your phone the whole time doesn't necessarily lend itself to good social experiences, let's say. And then they amongst themselves self-organize to say, do you know what? If you take your phone out when we're at the bar or in the cafe or whatever, you have to, the second you do it, you have to buy everyone's drinks. So there are self-organizing principles. But the one thing that it doesn't matter what era you were born into, if all of the time that you could spend doing something that doesn't involve technology is displaced into technology use, then you're only living half a life.
Yeah.
So non-technology related things is what humans did for millennia when our brains were evolving in response to changes in our environment from one generation to the next. Evolving in the sense of some things became the way they were because it gave someone a survival advantage over other humans. And so humans evolved various capacities to move their hands with great skill and dexterity. So if we're not moving our bodies and in a fuller way when we're doing our leisure time, we're missing out on something which we were built. We evolved to become this way because when we practice those kind of like caveman kind of activities, they are intrinsically valuable. So to the cheap dopamine point, it delivers dopamine in a way that makes you feel genuinely satisfied and happy and fulfilled, rather than chasing the bang, 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 really short, sharp hit of dopamine, which ultimately you can chase it all day long. And if you notice that you feel a malaise and you feel like a little bit depressed having spent half an hour of solidly social mediaing, it's because it's cheap, short hits of dopamine. And the brain wasn't evolved to respond well to that kind of regime of dopamine hits. It's long build up and then massive dopamine hit that gives you a long lasting sense of satisfaction. And none of social media is designed to do that. None of the tech is designed to do that. Long, meaningful bouts of contentment, because it only comes from hard graft and there is no hard graft. Anyway, let's move on.
Jack, for everything we've been saying here, and we're obviously, we want everybody to know that we're fully supportive of using technology, but using it in the right way. And we're also trying to be mindful of making sure that we're good, healthy human beings and we can communicate with each other. So with that in mind, how can we embrace this amazing, as you said at the top of the podcast, we are living in an incredible time where we are all guinea pigs, but it is incredibly exciting. How can technology be better embraced in the right way in the workplace? Do you have any sort of views on that? Risks and challenges, etc.
Yeah, so I think the main challenge in the workplace is everyone's scrabbling to find a way to use Gen AI. And while there isn't a huge, and I just take a moment, generative AI is not like spell check on your phone where it automatically spots and then suggests changes. That's artificial intelligence. But that's not generative artificial intelligence. Gen AI is where you've trained your model on the whole internet, everything that has ever been written anywhere. You can ask questions, and then the responses you get are very good at putting together, predicting what comes next in this sequence of words, right? So you've got to remember, Gen AI, it's stupid. It doesn't even understand the responses that it's giving. But when it puts those high probability sequences of words together in response to your prompt, it looks like just everything is always plausible. And actually, there's a huge amount of factually correct and good guidance in there. But the trouble is, there will always be 5 to 10% that's bullshit. So if you have no expertise in the domain that you're asking about, you won't catch that bullshit. And if you don't catch that bullshit and you just put that thing out, because when you read it, it's so impressive. Write me a chapter about the neuroscience of technology and the impacts of smartphones on the brain. If I put that in, it would give me a wonderful, much better structured thing. First time round, after like 60 seconds, you'd have that chapter and it would be 90 to 95% bang on the money. But only I, as an expert who've recently gone into the latest knowledge on this, would be able to go, hang on, I've never heard of that author, or I've never heard of that phenomenon. And then I will say to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, find me the reference that made you say that point there. And when I go to the reference in the academic paper, and either it doesn't exist, it's just made up, or you read the paper, and I'm the kind of person who will read the paper from top to bottom, and that can take half an hour to an hour. There will be no mention of the thing that Gen AI said, this is the proof of that line in this paragraph. And if you don't have expertise, you don't know how to catch its naughty poo-poos. And so therefore you have to proceed with caution. By all means, use Gen AI to create the first draft. But if you don't double check the output of Gen AI using some kind of expertise, you are going to be made to look foolish. And once you've made yourself or your company look foolish in front of your clients, there will be an erosion of the trust. Right? No one pays, anyone can put a prompt into these Gen AI models, and anyone can copy and paste the response and just send it off as if it was their work. As soon as you get caught doing that, you are toast.
Yeah.
You are toast.
Also, then there's more of that stuff out there, which means that when you put those prompts in, it's got more, not factual stuff to draw on.
I honestly think so many people use it. Oh, hey, great enthusiasm, Gen AI product. You don't have to write your own blogs. You know, we can write the blogs for you. Just tell us the different themes, and then you can pre-post them and schedule them. And when 5 to 10% of any automatically made blog, or you can automatically generate podcasts now, has errors in it and falsehoods. When you train your new LLM, large language model, on everything that was ever written on the internet, including the last year or two since Gen AI got useful, and it's added lots of falsehood, it means your LLM will be even more unreliable. Yes. So not just the AI hallucinations, but the input, garbage data in, garbage data out. That's always the rule with computer software. It's going to increase the amount of rubbish, because I don't like using Americanisms. It's going more rubbish, more litter in terms of your data quality, the more rubbish is going to come out of it. So, it doesn't mean you can't avail yourself of the hugely useful first drafting capacity of these things, or, sketching out using DALL-E or Midjourney or one of these Gen AI image generators, sketch out your idea in that so that you can send it to a human who can actually have a discussion with and can realize what you really wanted it to be. But, I think it's great for first sketches. There's also another problem in that sometimes Gen AI is being used a lot by usually younger people to have discussions and kind of help people shape their thoughts, because it is so useful. If you bear in mind it's 90% bang on the money, it's really useful in helping you develop your thoughts and ideas. You just have a dialogue with Gen AI as if it was a very well-informed person who's your neighbor, who you have a chat with. But then you can end up relying on it so much that you lose some of those capabilities to reflect on your own thoughts yourself. And there have been a couple of little papers come out. It's very early doors in terms of research published in trustworthy peer-reviewed academic journals, looking at the positive and negative consequences of overuse of Gen AI. But the early clues are that some people, they struggle to think without it. They struggle to string sentences together and find the words. And the upshot is, really easy rule of thumb, if we've learned anything from the impact of pre-Gen AI technology on the brain that we could apply to the post-Gen AI, useful Gen AI era, is if you use it to a mild and moderate degree, it's usually absolutely fine. Technology is incredibly useful and helpful, but use it to excess, use it for everything, get lazy in using your own brain, and your brain will go to mush, because the brain is very much use it or lose it.
To that's what you were talking about last week, whatever you pay attention to, your brain will strengthen your ability to do that thing. So if you're overusing technology, the other parts of your brain actually demise, don't they? I think you call it cognitive miserly.
Cognitive miserliness, yeah. We are cognitive misers. If we can take a shortcut, we will take a shortcut. And with something as powerful as Gen AI, people are going to use it to do their work. They'll find ways to get better at prompt engineering, meaning writing the right string of words so that Gen AI actually does what you intended it to do, rather than going off and doing something similar but not quite right. We'll get really good at prompt engineering, and then it'll generate such an overwhelming amount of output that we'll be too lazy, or we'll feel too time pressure to actually check it before we put it out. And then we will lose the ability to structure such reports or plans or schedules or whatever ourselves. And if we'll end up in a situation potentially in 5-10 years time where people don't even have these skills because they used to have them or haven't used them or didn't develop the capability in the first place. And then how can you complain if someone replaces you by Gen AI? If you can't offer any kind of advantage over someone just putting it in a prompt themselves?
I sort of come back to the wisdom of nature, that you can't force nature. There are certain things in nature, you can't say, the farmer can't go, I'll tell you what, I'm fed up of these cold winters and having to fertilize the land. I'll do everything in 2 months. There are certain laws of nature. It takes time for that seed to seed and to grow. I do think that in terms of we as human beings and humanity and the way we communicate with each other and our thinking, if you take these shortcuts, you are literally cutting across the major building blocks of humankind. And that is not good. Anything if I think to myself, anything that I've ever achieved in my life is always come as a result of some hard work.
Agreed. Same for me. 100%.
I notice there are people that work hard, but they're doing what they call easy hard work. So they're doing lots of work, but it's easy.
Yeah. High volume.
Yeah, high volume, right? But actually, the biggest prize, in my view, go to those people that do the hard work that takes time, that takes thinking, and you get unique results. And it's nourishing for the soul, nourishing for you. You feel good at the end of it because you've created something. It's like you going out and writing a book. You know, it takes time and effort. To put on an event like we did last week, it takes time and effort.
Yeah.
So it's original thought, original ideas, and that is got to be better for humankind long term. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a big message is almost like, you know, slow down. Technology is at a pace, but we need to slow down almost and maintain those.
So why is technology pushing us so fast? If we feel every moment of our day, you know, you take a break from the computer screen and then you fill all of those vacuums with screen use, right? There's no time for contemplation. There's no time for reflection. And actually, it's the contemplation and reflection where you reach conclusions, where the unconscious processes, which are like, you know, unconscious brain can process 1 million bits per second of information, but we're not consciously aware of any of that filtering process that goes through. So much information comes in through the eyes, the ears, the skin, you know, the sense of smell, taste, all these things, and thoughts and ideas and memories. There's so much going on, but our conscious awareness is the tip of the iceberg, 11 bits per second or 16 bits per second, there or thereabouts. It's about 1 million to 1 ratio. And if every moment when your mind, you know, when you're not actively engaged in doing something, is spent actively engaged in doing something else, you don't create the space for those conclusions to your thoughts and those solutions to your problems to bubble up from the unconscious brain into conscious awareness. And that is the major problem. So from Silicon Valley's perspective, they want us to consume one app after the other because it drives revenue, and they don't care whether we sink or swim in life, right? They just want us to stay on our devices. But from our perspective, when we're at a bus stop, get off your phone, stare into the distance. If you're traveling, get off your tech, look out the window, contemplate, think about life, think about work, think about whatever you like, but don't have it being make sure it's internally generated. Slow down enough to actually process the previous rounds of input and integrate them with your pre-existing knowledge and wisdom and perspectives, and update the model. That's what's happening overnight, right? The experiences of 16 hours of the day are being integrated with your previous experience in your brain, disposing of most of the experiences you had in any given day. But that interesting thing you learned, that interesting exchange with someone who did you a favor, you know, you consolidate all of that overnight.
Have a conversation with somebody.
Have a conversation with somebody. And if they're on their phone, slap it out of their hand.
Because, you know, if you look on the train, and I would say 90% of people, are either asleep, with their earpods in, or they're on their phone. And in fact, I was even listening to a lady the other day, and she made a good point. She was talking about being in the gym. That people in a gym you can go to a gym, and I know this myself. You can see the same person week after week after week, after months, never ever talk to them. You're probably more likely to talk to them if you met them in the street and say, you're the guy. All right.
Yes.
But 9 months you've been going to that gym and you've never spoke to them. Why? Because you've got your ears full of other music.
So there's an amazing book called Alone Together.
Alone Together, yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something that you said the other day, Martin, was just, you know, you said just because we can, should we?
Yeah.
And it's like the Silicon Valley aren't going to do it for us.
No.
You know, so it is up to us to be conscious.
So this podcast is like the smelling salts under your nose. If you're listening to this in the gym, take your earbuds out and, you know, go and find the other person in the gym who, you know, is in between exercise regimes, who doesn't have earbuds in, and just say hi, and then nothing more. Hi, move on. That little exchange between strangers, it has a disproportionate, like, feeling socially connected. It is so important for our physical and mental health. And the converse of that, people who are lonely have much higher rates of cancer, much higher rates of cardiovascular disease, and so they die sooner than people who feel socially connected. And that's going to get worse because technology is leaving us isolated from one another. Even though we're fiercely in contact with people, we're blocking out the people in our midst, and it's the people in our midst that provide us with a more palpable, tangible sense of social connectedness. And then also what's related, higher rates of depression and anxiety amongst people who feel socially isolated. So fight against, it's the perception of loneliness, it's the perception of social connectedness. And if you actually exchange a few kind words with someone who's serving you in a shop or sat next to you in a cafe, or someone on the adjacent treadmill, you don't have to bang on and have a proper chat. Just mutually recognizing each other's existence and saying hello, it has a very powerful impact on our neurobiology that leads to really good outcomes. So we need to move away from technology isolation.
I was just telling Lisa the other day, my wife and I made this promise. I said, I'm going to start making sure I speak to people more, because we were walking down by the river here. And a guy coming towards me, and I wouldn't typically say anything, but I just thought he had a little rucksack on, didn't recognize him. And I said to him, how are you? I just got chatting to him, and I said, are you, have you got far to go? And he said, actually, yes, I'm walking back to Cornwall.
Wow. Love it.
Now, we're in Shepperton, right, in southwest London. So he's just come out of London, and he said, I'm actually on quite a special little trip. When I was born premature, and there were 2 babies in 2 incubators, and sadly, the other person died. I lived. And this is like a pilgrimage to this individual. And so I promised myself I'm going to go back to my place of birth and then walk back home. I mean, something like that anyway.
Amazing.
Very poignant. And both Fee and I walked away with this feeling of, wow, that was an amazing moment. And it taught me a really important thing. If you just say hello, if you just connect, you might have these little magical moments, and you recognize what humanity is all about, which is a far cry from everything we've been talking about today. And it's a rich, and I'm much more likely to remember that moment than the little dopamine hit I would have got from watching a little TikTok video walking along the river.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I'm probably tripped up and fallen in the river.
Yeah. So here's to embracing technology. Absolutely, we're all big supporters of it.
In moderation.
And it's Look, Jack, it's been fantastic. We feel like we could go on for hours on this subject.
I literally could listen to you for hours.
Thanks.
I really do appreciate your candidness and your willingness to share these ideas. Anything we can help you in that cause, we can introduce you to other people. We're definitely going to do that with our corporate clients and try and get you in front of you.
100%, yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
To speak up, because I think
we need to wake people up to the realities of just what's important and what's not with regard to tech use and otherwise.
Yeah.
And if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way? We'll obviously put links to your website and stuff.
So drjack.co.uk is my website, where I put my blogs and my sort of public facing stuff. Neuroform.com, so it's short for Neuroscience Informed Consulting. Neuroform.com is my sort of professional thing, more like business facing, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm reluctantly on X, and slightly trying to do a bit more Instagram. So Dr. Jack Lewis _neuro. I was late to the game, so I had to have a much longer handle than people normally do.
What, you mean there's another Dr. Jack Lewis out there?
Yeah.
Must be.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much. Really
you.
appreciate the energy, the information, the knowledge sharing. Really appreciate it. And
Pleasure.
Reconnecting with you again. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.